Hey ladies and gentlemen, Duckville here, bringing you a PvP from Heart of the Swarm. Of course, I know a lot of people want to see more Heart of the Swarm action, and if you have your own stuff, whether you're down in some of the lower leagues or if you're up in the pro leagues, I do not care, send me some replays. It's always good to see anyone playing Heart of the Swarm because it is very new, things are always changing, and it's very interesting to see how people play the game. And you know, if it's an interesting game or if it's a longer game, of course many people know I like to cast longer games. I will do my best to cast it and put it up for you. So, starting at the top right-hand side in the red is our Protoss here by the name of bnbYuffie. Shout out to him. If he ever gets to see this replay, maybe he will, maybe he won't. Down the bottom left-hand side, in the blue, is my good friend who has been playing a lot of Heart of the Swarm, doing a really good job, and, you know, representing his team quite nicely, of course, from Team Robot Esports, it is Gemini. Now, in previous games, of course, we've seen Gemini playing, what was it? There was a PvZ, I think, in the previous game on Antigua Shipyard from Heart of the Swarm, which was really interesting. And, yeah, PvP is a little bit more dynamic, I would say, in Heart of the Swarm. Of course, you've got some differences in the units that come out. There are various sorts of timings that can be done compared to what they would have been previously. Of course, in PvP and Wings of Liberty, there's sort of three main situations that a game will proceed at, especially at the high level, where it's just incredibly predictable, which is, number one, someone will do a gateway timing and, you know, either they'll screw it up or they'll pull off some shenanigans and get a win straight off the bat, sometimes off one base. Option number two is that you'll have either Blink Stalkers or some kind of robo tech coming off one or two bases. Generally, it's sort of seemed to be lately, it's sort of gotten up to two bases, so it's not as much like StarCraft was back in the very early beta where people would only get one base. But either way, it still happens like that. So you'll have someone with a blink tech or a quick robo tech, and yeah, it sort of ends up like that. Option number three is you get to a situation where you have two bases, you start your Colossus production, something like that, and it sort of gets to a point where both players are sort of worried to engage, because of course you've got to really worry about the concave of your units, your positioning, your spread of Colossus, that kind of thing, and it will generally always go to a much longer game if you can get to that stage, because it sort of comes this little standoff where both players have a large amount of Colossus, you got double Colossus production, that kind of thing, and yeah, and then after that the game will generally end when both players have like a 15 versus 15 Colossus battle, and whoever slightly messes up their concave of units, their spread, whether they're clumped or not, will lose the game, and that's basically it, because, you know, there's no real way to come back in PvP if you lose a large amount of Colossus like that. Now, Heart of the Swarm, things are different. We've got ways to counter Colossus a little bit easier. So in terms of option number three, you can see Tempests that come out, and they do a great amount of damage, of course, against massive units, and you can produce those out. They are pretty heavy on the resource cost. Of course, they're I think it's 200, 300, or is it the other way around? Something like that, which is quite a lot. Actually, I think it's 300, 200. So those can come out in a sizable amount and deal with Colossus very easy. So it makes it a very sort of different sort of game to watch. And of course, as we can see from both of these plays, you can get out a mothership core, and right at the start you've got a way to defend yourself against the option number one, the gateway sort of timings there, where you've got a mothership core out to try and deal with those earlier sort of units, and they can also help out with later timings as well. But as we can see, Gemini going to push up on his opponent. He does have three Stalkers. He chronoed those out very quickly and has taken out Yuffie's mothership there, which is quite nice. The core is now down. Looks as if one of the Stalkers is maybe going to get away, but it's now 2-on-2, although Yuffie has lost one of his Stalkers very quickly there, because it was it was sort of 2-on-1 for a second there. But now Gemini going to chase after this one remaining Stalker. Is he going to catch it? We'll find out in a second. Meanwhile, back at home for Yuffie, we'll go with Yuffie because that's easier to say. Yuffie has gotten up a Stargate and is going to go to the Phoenix tech. I do like this. Gives you easy access to a couple of Phoenix to do some harassment. As we can see, most players will sort of head out with 2, maybe 3, try and get some kills in your opponent's mineral line. Gemini, however, went for a very quick Twilight Council here, just a standard sort of Blink Stalker timing here. The addition to Heart of the Swarm, as you can see here, is that the Mothership Core can come along. You don't need to have an observer along to try and help you out with getting a vision on the high ground. So that's a bit of a difference here. If you're going to switch over to Heart of the Swarm, you'll notice that these timings can be a lot more effective, and you have to sort of judge your preparation based on that instead of when you would normally see an observer or trying to counter it with an observer, something like that. So we'll see what Yuffie has to do here to try and defend against this. There are already 4 Stalkers out, a couple more are going to warp in a second as well, because back at home, Gemini has gotten up 3 gates in total. Blink is just finishing up now. A couple of the Phoenix trying to do some work at home for at Gemini's base as well. But a good force field keeps most of the units off the ramp for the moment, but now the Mothership Core is gone. Good snipe by Yuffie there to make sure that his opponent couldn't really deal with that. But of course, with the vision on the high ground, Gemini is now able to blink inside. Is he going to be able to keep these Stalkers alive? That is the big question. As you can see, he's sort of pressing up against that force field. Yuffie doing a good job of keeping the force field up so that Gemini can't really get inside, but here we go. Mothership Core is also up for Yuffie, so he's got that to help out with the defense. Looks as if the Stalkers will be blinking around, trying to do some more damage. Meanwhile, back at home for Yuffie, he has gotten a couple of probe kills. I do like his micro at the moment. The Stalkers starting to thin out in their number. There's only 4 left now. There are a couple of warp-ins available, maybe. Actually, no, Gemini, I think, had to use those back at home. So 4 Stalkers. Here is the defense of the Photon Overcharge. Look at the range on that thing. That is incredible. And that helps out with the defense against those early Blink Stalkers coming through. As you can see, Nexus now charged up with Photon Overcharge, doing 20 damage. It has a range of 13. That is quite a sizable distance. And now, as we can see, Yuffie starting to even up the trade here, sort of making himself, you know, doing his best to even it up. He's taken out the probes that were on gas for Gemini, so Gemini now just a little bit behind where he would normally be in the gas income. But as we can see, he's held his worker lead. He's 2 up. He's now also grabbing an expansion as well. And he's going to look to try and stabilize and perhaps catch a couple of these Phoenix out as well. There they go. They're just trying to fly away as best as possible. And trying to intercept with a couple of the Stalkers is Gemini, but he's not going to be able to catch them. Phoenix very fast, of course. So after that early sort of engagement, sort of demonstrating a couple of the different usages of the Mothership Core there, of course, using the Photon Overcharge for defense, and also using it for spotting the high ground, as we saw Gemini doing, so his Blink Stalkers could jump up top and do some harassment. Just looking at the actual supply count, Gemini a little bit low now because of, obviously, some of the probe losses. He still hasn't actually added in the probes into the gas just yet. I think he's just making sure he's got enough minerals, but gas is going to be an issue in a second. Yuffie doing a great job of keeping those Phoenix microed up and keeping them alive and well. Looks as if he's now going to try and push inside. There is a probe with this army. A little bit surprised he hasn't put a pylon down. There is still... there he goes. He finally does put one down. Looks like Gemini may actually lose this Nexus. I don't think he's going to have enough to defend. Of course, keep in mind that he has to keep his tabs on what Yuffie's Phoenix are up to. But Gemini does blink down. The Zealot is trapped inside the main base because of that force field. Beautifully done by Yuffie. But now, as we can see, a couple of warp-ins trying to help out with dealing with those units. The Nexus is on 369 HP, so it is going to survive for the moment. Phoenix coming across to try and help out. Photon Overcharge goes down on the Nexus of Gemini, so it looks as if he will keep that alive. Of course, that 20 damage is pretty huge when it comes to dealing with these sort of lower sort of strength gateway units of Yuffie. And as you can see, look at the range on that thing. That is incredible. It goes this far. As you can see, the little dots here. That is just insane. But he is going to be able to fend off this attack, dealing with that relatively well. I mean, he's fended it off. I don't think he lost too many probes. We'll have a look at the actual worker loss tab in just a second. There you go. 11 worker kills. So he actually did get quite a few inside the main base, of course. So that's not going to be fun for Gemini at all. He's going to need to rebuild those. But we're, you know, despite the situation at the moment, we're relatively even. The worker count did go down a little bit because Gemini sniped a few off during his Blink Stalker attack, but during this whole time that Yuffie went for his attack, he didn't really get too much production going back at home. So things are they're relatively stable, I would say, and it's going to really depend on which tech these two guys go for. Now, looks as if Gemini is going to pick up the Zealot charge. It's just researching now, chrono boosting that out. I'll be interested to see if any of the other units come out. Of course, the Oracle is perhaps a unit you can use using the Time Warp skill that they have now. Can be quite useful in dealing with Zealots, keeping them off your face. And but of course you do have sentries that can also help out with that. So there are a couple of ways with dealing with ground units very nicely. Of course, Blink Stalkers will normally want to blink out of a Time Warp, but you know, it sort of depends if they've got that available. Of course, the Tempest is another option, and maybe, given that Yuffie actually went for the Stargate pretty quickly, maybe we'll see a Tempest come out of him, but he's busy at the moment trying to deal with some of these probes. Look at the worker kills, goes up to 17, not too bad at all for Yuffie. He's doing a great job with that. Really keeps the pressure on your opponent. It's a lot like playing Zerg and going for a Mutalisk play right at the start. What you want to do is try and keep your opponent inside their base. If not inside their main, at least keep them inside their area of the map, because you want to make sure that they are not attacking you. While back at home, you're building up your probes, you're building up your tech. As we can see, Yuffie is now grabbing double robos, so it looks as if he will go to a Colossus tech. Needs to get that gas up as well. As we can see, he's just putting up the gases 3 and 4 at his natural expand. I think that might be a little bit slower than what he would have liked to make sure he can engage properly in double Colossus production. Of course, it will be interesting to see. He's not really going to have enough gas for it just at the moment, considering he's going to have to spend the 200 getting the robotics bay, the support bay out as well. He's going to put that down along with a couple more gates, making sure he's using up all of that money. Quite nice. That'll take him up to a total of 9 gates, which is quite a lot, considering you're going double robo as well. So we'll see how he deals with that. That could be perhaps a little bit of an economic sort of, you know, sink there. The fact that he's going to be throwing out a lot of money into the Colossus and then won't really be able to utilize all of those gates, but it'll depend. If he's going to take a third base, I would say he might try and grab that very soon. Gemini, being on the ball as usual, is going to catch that out though, with Zealot just heading inside. Going to keep an eye on the third here. And Yuffie continues on with the Phoenix pressure, although he goes inside and then actually doesn't really do too much, so he's just going to head back for now. Phoenix, in PvP, I still think they're very underrated compared to how useful they are. A lot of people don't really keep them alive to the mid to the late stage, but you can keep them alive to deal with things, especially in Heart of the Swarm. You can use them to deal with a mothership core. You can also use them to lift up certain units. Of course, if you find an opponent who has Immortals or something like that, lift the Immortals up, and that takes quite a lot out of the battle. So that's always a good reason to keep some of them alive, and it was good that Yuffie kept them alive. Where are they? Okay, they are alive. They're down here. 3 of them doing a little bit of pressure inside the natural. 1 does go down. 1 is on the verge of going down, given that it has no shields. Now being targeted down. Does get out just in time. So Gemini looking, he's starting to take up himself. Both players at 45 probes at the moment. Gemini sitting on a total of 6 gates. He's going to have some extra upgrades coming out as well now with the Forge. Chrono boosting out +1 to weapons. Of course, in PvP, normally you don't really worry too much about a Forge until this sort of mid-stage of the game, because the Forge realistically only going to help out with the big power units, such as the Colossus and the Archons as well. Those guys benefit the most from those sorts of upgrades. So that's, once you have those coming out in a greater number, that's when it's a good time to help out with those upgrades. And as we can see, with Archon count starting to go up, he's going to be looking pretty with all of those upgrades. And now, meanwhile, for Yuffie picking up his third base, got a nice probe count over here, 15 of 24. You can see that helpful little counter there, now going down to 9 of 12, but he does have 3-3 in both of the gas. Now back down the southern side, it looks as if Yuffie did pick up a Tempest. He's going to use the long range of that unit to try and take down some of the buildings, or perhaps some of the workers inside Gemini's main base. The Stalkers going to have to be careful. They won't be able to take care of this Tempest because of the range. Look at that. That's how far that range goes just here, and it looks like a hallucinated Phoenix coming across. Not really going to be too helpful. Of course, there's no no real way for Gemini to deal with this Tempest just at the moment, but he does have his own one, which has just popped out. The battle commences, Tempest versus Tempest. As we can see, it looks like Gemini is going to have the upper hand because his opponent is one shot down on where Gemini is because of the Stalkers doing some damage. It looks like Gemini will win the battle. No! They're both going to die. Quick lol out of Gemini there. So that was a very interesting battle. Of course, that means that Gemini can now leave his base a little bit more freely because of the threat of the Tempest being gone. The Phoenix, there are a couple of Phoenix still out, but 2 Phoenix is not really too much of an issue to deal with. Perhaps a cannon could go up in here, just one cannon, just to make sure that some of these probes are protected. There is still a little bit of gas left over, so it's not as if that is going to be an issue, but we do have a big issue in the middle of the map. Big concave here from Yuffie. He's got Immortals and Stalkers at the top side. The Mothership Core is here as well. 3 Colossi, actually a little bit mispositioned there. And a recall out takes the most of the units back home. A few of them are actually left here in the middle of nowhere, so the Stalker's going to try and capitalize on that. Looks like Yuffie may lose one of these Colossi. Nope, brings them to the back, nicely microed, and the Immortals come to the front, doing a lot of damage. And as we can see, it looks like Yuffie is going to lose out a little bit in that battle there. Does take him down 1 Colossus, I think it was, in total, but no, actually, wait, he actually kept all of them alive. That's pretty impressive. So he's now got a total of 5 Colossus. If we look on the unit counting, we can see 16 Stalkers out for Yuffie. He's got 2 Immortals, 6 Colossus, and the 2 Phoenix still alive. The Mothership Core in the big fleet here, and he's going to look to try and pressure the 3rd base of Gemini. So we'll see how this goes. Gemini, meanwhile, 3 Tempest out, 2 Templar, which are now switching into an Archon. Going to make the Archon total 3, but he's got a lot of pressure coming in at this 3rd base. As we can see, a little bit of a bad angle there for Gemini, given that he's going to be lining up for those Colossus to splash onto him, but the Tempest coming across from the high ground, going to be able to deal with those Colossi very quickly. As we can see, they do a great amount of damage, and he is actually going to be able to really downsize that Colossus army, but at what cost? Zealots charging in, the Templar, no, he got rid of the Templar, that's right. Got rid of the Templar, switched them into Archons, and the Archons are going to be doing a lot of damage with their +1, but they do get taken out eventually. The Stalker's trying to find a range on the Tempest here, but the Tempest just so powerful. Look at that. That is 2 salvos from each of those Tempests, taking down the Colossus. Of course, the Tempest doing bonus damage to massive, 60 damage per shot, so the Colossus not going to have a fun time dealing with Tempest at all, but perhaps these Tempests are out of position, but no blink on the Stalkers of Yuffie, so I don't know if he's going to catch all of these. Perhaps one of them will go down. There is a Photon Overcharge again on top of the Nexus, but oh, that was actually just from before, so it just finishes up now. The Stalker's actually doing a really good job taking down 2 of those Tempests, which is quite nice considering the cost of them. And now, as we can see, Gemini are going to force that back for the moment. So both these players engaging, and it's sort of it's not exactly a win-win scenario for either player. As we can see, Gemini has cleared out quite a lot of his opponent's units. He's now just sort of sitting back, trying to rebuild everything. The Mothership Core now switching, upgrading into the full Mothership. That does take the 100 in-game seconds. Double Colossi trying to resupply here. So this, you know, given is sort of a passive moment, and because of the fact that that both players sort of traded out their armies, it does bode a little bit better for Gemini, because he will have a little bit of a supply lead, especially with Tempest coming out, an easy way to counter those Colossus. But we are going to sit back for a little bit, so there will be a recovery from both players. And as we can see, it looks as if Yuffie has decided to pick up some interesting mixes of units. He's got a carrier out. There is a Void Ray on the way. Of course, the Void Rays can help with Tempest because they will be able to charge up and do that extra damage on the Tempest. But of course, the Tempest, if they get into a larger count, which is currently sitting at 4, with another 2 coming out very soon because of the double Stargate from Gemini, should be able to clean up the Flying Chandelier Void Rays, given that they will be doing quite a lot of damage. Look at that, 6 Tempest out, there's going to be 8 very shortly, and I'm not sure how Yuffie is going to be able to deal with this. Of course, way to deal with the Tempest can be to go for a much larger Stalker count. I'm not sure. Generally, when I play PvP, I do go for a Phoenix into carrier style, so it's a little bit like what Yuffie has done here, but generally I'd have a few more carriers by now, and carriers can deal with the Tempest, but when you've let your opponent get to a count of 8 Tempest, it can be quite troublesome given that 60 damage. So Gemini going to have a quick look, does find a couple of Stalkers, may have seen that that cloak is there. How is he going to detect the cloaked units? Well, he's going to either need an observer, or perhaps, if the Mothership Core comes along, he will be able to use the observer spell, what's it called? The detection spell that the Mothership Core has. I don't actually know where his Mothership Core is. Is it out on the map? No, he doesn't actually have one. So, oh, okay, alright, well, Mothership goes down very quickly, so that's not really an issue. Of course, the bonus damage on massive units counts towards those Motherships as well. Looks as if we are going to have a very big battle. Colossus numbering around about 6 here, so they're going to be doing a lot of damage on the ground, but the Tempests are doing their own a large amount of damage. As we can see, Gemini is just tearing through a lot of those units, and with the large Stalker count, that means that the large Zealot count of Yuffie, the large Zealot count of Gemini is going to absolutely tear through those with the Tempest in the sky. And as you can see, talking about Tempest being the new Colossus, and Gemini is definitely going to win this. He has now torn through his opponent's army. No more Stalkers left, no real production capability available left for Yuffie, and he is going to GG out and leave the game. So great play there from both players. It was actually a really interesting game. That's a lot like what PvP in Heart of the Swarm is going to look like. I think you'll have a player who wants to go for Tempest and a player who wants to try and go old school, going with some Colossus. And if you can get there and do some damage before the Tempest get into a large amount like this, you may be able to win with the Robotech. Like, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be bad, but once the Tempests get out in these large numbers, like how many has Gemini got? He's got 7 out on the map at the moment, with a couple more about to be in production, I would assume. They're very, very hard to deal with. So, you know, we'll see how this proceeds in terms of the beta at the moment. If you have your own replays, of course, please feel free to send them through to duckvillelol@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter, it's @duckvillelol. And, of course, please feel free to share the video and, you know, click the like button and all that sort of stuff. It's all good. We'll see some more Heart of the Swarm coming up very soon. Cheers.